What a genuine pleasure it is to be reconnected with so many of you who've played such an important part in the evolving story of this unique organization over the last 40 years. It's a tribute to those like Maurice and my colleagues here who were so visionary at the time, and it's also, I think, a reflection on the dedication and commitment of Secretariat staff in particular. They work under extremely difficult situations at times, and I think we may not all give them due recognition that is well deserved. For me, it was a genuine pleasure and a real privilege to have been a part of this organization for a brief period of time. Occam asked us to be personal and to be very honest. And so let me make two observations about the past. And we'll come back to the future, but about the past. I wonder if you can imagine what it was like to be in this facility right after Rio. We heard about the immense exhilaration, the excitement about what Rio was all about, and about the frighteningly large agenda. We had a totally new concept, sustainable development. We didn't know what it meant. We had a new institution to work with, the Commission on Sustainable Development. We had two brand new treaties that had been agreed to on important issues like climate change and biodiversity. We had Agenda 21, we had new principles, and we had, for the first time, a real moment in time that allowed political space for civil society. That, in my view, is one of the real legacies of Rio. It left us with an opportunity for stakeholders, for citizens, for people at large to actually be heard as part of the UN system. If you can imagine then what that felt like. I used to say, there was an old Zen saying that said, after enlightenment, the laundry. And that is exactly how we felt. We had all become enlightened through the Rio process, and then all of a sudden you had to do something about it. So my lessons learned, quite frankly, are that there was no common definition of the relationship between environment and sustainable development. And funnily enough, I think I heard that this morning. There was no agreement on the role of UNEP other than saying every agency worth its salt now has a sustainable development component to it, and oh, by the way, we should also strengthen UNEP. There was little thought given or agreement reached about implementation. Mustafa's point, how do we actually do this? There was a great difference between rhetoric and action. We all talked about change, but don't touch my favorite program. We talked about fragmentation, but don't you dare try and coordinate me if I'm not in UNEP. And we wanted a vibrant, effective, world-class UNEP, but don't give us the tools to do it. And those, quite frankly, are the reflections on what happened when you actually tried to deliver on a very important agenda. But let me rush to make a second observation, and that has to do with moments of real pride. Occam said this morning that we needed to be reminded of what we were able to achieve. I went back and looked at some of the things that we achieved in those 5 short years following Rio. And I want to just very quickly run through them right now because there are 2 messages. One is that notwithstanding not having answers to all of those questions I raised, we were able to deliver a lot. But more importantly, think about the issues I mentioned and what was started at that time and what Occam said they're now able to deliver 20 years later. That speaks to the volume of time that's required to actually make some of these things happen. We broke new ground, for example, on dealing with environment and trade, environment and financial institutions, which were never part of the traditional agenda. We broadened considerably the chemicals agenda, persistent organic pollutants, prior informed consent. And I'm proud to say we developed the first GEO, a new way of looking at state-of-the-world reporting. And you heard today how far that has come. We extended our reach, developing things like environmental guidelines for the Olympics, global environmental citizenship programs around the world. We focused on the regions because that was where we knew we would reach local people, local problems, local environment ministers who needed our help. And for every region around the world, you could see what we'd accomplished. The Lusaka Agreement, 61 cleaner production centers around the world. Tierra America, a wonderful publication, newspaper in Latin America that won all kinds of prizes. The discussion about lead for children in North America, and of course in West Asia, rehabilitation following the Gulf War. We then had the multilateral environmental agreements. UNEP was responsible for shepherding the creation of the Secretariat for the Biodiversity Convention. We continued with more and more ozone-depleting substances being considered, developed a world atlas on desertification, and a global plan of action on the marine environment. The GEF was created, Sustainable Cities programs with our fellow colleagues in Habitat. Mercure, trying to develop with the European Space Agency adequate communication systems here in Nairobi. And the beginning of reform. We received from the Secretary General a renewed and strengthened mandate, developed the Nairobi Declaration, and of course developed a high-level committee of ministers of environment and officials to assist in meeting the needs that they perceived within their own countries. And finally, we began to develop a culture of accountability and results orientation. I was just delighted to hear a reporting on results, because when we first started talking about the need to hold ourselves accountable and to deliver not just actions but real results, I was told that was simply a Western management technique and wouldn't work in the UN system at all. It was a time when we were trying to up our game in terms of financial resources and also human resources, learning to work as teams, having real performance appraisals, again, to hold people to account. So my views of the future have really been shaped by a past which was a real privilege of participating in learning together with countries around the world what the problems were and what we could achieve, the genuine excitement of creating something new from scratch, from building something as a team, but thirdly, frustration and disappointment at the lack of urgency and no sustained momentum to do the things that really matter.